children's choir, and we had to go with the shift in the children's choir because, you know, when you start a children's choir, everybody thinks it's basically about cute kids who sing kind of clumsily, but isn't it cute? And we as the leadership had to convey a completely different attitude, that these children are not here to make you think how cute. They are here to bring you into the presence of holy God. And that may include feelings of sweetness and cuteness, but it also includes, man, those kids are really in the spirit. They are really taking this seriously. So you use your children as well, not use your children, but you coach your children, nurture them, like, and Mandy does this in her rehearsals. Like, why are we doing this? We are doing this because the people of God need to be reminded of God's presence. And you know who gets to do that at the beginning of the service this Sunday? You. So it's those kinds of, I think, cultural changes that is modeled by leadership and that you hold for a long time as the change goes. And you also experiment. I think that Faith Development Hour experiment didn't ultimately pan out, but then it ultimately did, right? It was an experiment, and you stay nimble, I guess, as a community, and you try things, communicate why you're trying things, and adjust as you need to. The other thing, Greg, you reminded me of is, as we've had to now expand, we have to expand our adult offerings now. Because Forum has an amazing following, just this like regular group of people, and then an irregular group of people who come based on topic. I mean, it is like this establishment. So how do we create alternatives to that? We have to be really deliberate about that. For example, what do we create that would specifically appeal to parents with young children? So that's one question I have for you. Like, how do you, like, if they're dropping off their kids, like, what is it that you invite people to come do specifically for them? Not, oh, we're offering a conversation and you're welcome, but we have created this program for people just like you who are dropping off your kids right here, and we want you to be in this room with excellent coffee and, you know, and then there's some awesome topic that they would be interested in. So that's another.
I'd like to make a comment about that, if I could.
Yeah.
You know, looking at the people in the room, our parents and our grandparents' generation felt an obligation, in many cases, to be at church. But today that's not really the case. People will come if they see that there's something that they're really interested in or will benefit from, and whatever. And I'm just a volunteer, but like so many, try very hard to make the programs something that people want to be a part of and publicize it. We have a weekly email that goes out to anybody who signs up for it for the entire church, and a monthly newsletter. And people work out with a big part of it.
Let's see. Go ahead.
I'm interested in how you're using music to enhance your worship experience. Holiday Church went from 2 services, very unique different services, one being a very contemporary band, guitars, drums, the whole bit, and one being traditional, which was organ music and choir. And we had to, we combined those. Difficult transition, but also in the end, it turned out very rich because we have contemporary music some Sundays the choir sings, some Sundays. So we get all the different levels in, and we also found that the youth came more or they felt engaged more by our meshing those services. But it was very difficult.
Yeah. One of my philosophies with music and spirituality is that music speaks to people in lots and lots of different ways. So there's no right way to do it or wrong way to do it. We have lots of people, incredible musicians, some very classically trained, and others who can pick up a guitar and like totally rock out. And you have to be able to incorporate all of that. And one of the things that I found with this shift that we have been making over several years is that members of our congregation are able to see every age or desire or whatever it is, and find value in that, so that in the same service, the chancel choir can sing a piece by Handel, while we also have a hymn accompanied by guitar and a xylophone solo by one of our youth. You can, and in my opinion, should incorporate all of that value musically into every service. And when you end up with a service that's geared towards people who like contemporary music, and there's one that's geared towards people who like traditional music, those people can be very happy in their little bubbles, but then you have two congregations who are missing out on all of this that could come together and just be so fruitful and beautiful. And so our music staff, I think, really tries to appeal to lots of different ways to worship through music.
Are you full-time?
I am.
You got my money.
Mandy, do you want to talk a little bit more about
Sure.
your
Yeah.
duties?
So in this shift, kind of on that same topic, I have seen through this shift, like I said, people who are maybe at first like, oh, I don't really like that kind of thing happening in the service, and I don't really want to do that. They see what the kids are doing is valuable and it's important, and not just for them, but for me too. I have a 2-year-old son, and when he's actually a pretty good church baby, but there were some moments when he was first born when he would like, in the middle of a service, and it made me feel really
sermon.
right. That's right. He actually never did that during the music. It was always but at first it was like, oh my God, I gotta get this kid out of here, and I'm working, and so then my husband would have to leave and miss, and now I mean, he does these little, he likes the acoustics, and he does these little things, and people around here are like, oh, he's here, he's in this room, and he is worshiping. He's 2 years old, and he knows how to worship, and he's welcome here. And there are a gaggle of girls who like to sit by me because I'm the children's choir director, and together, in the first pew, in the middle of the service, 3rd and 4th and 5th graders, we share a hymnal and we sing traditional hymns together because they know that they're welcome there. And one of the things that's really beautiful is that some of our older children, they have the choice to go to kids' community worship or stay in a sanctuary, and many times they stay because they are developing into human beings who can worship instead of kids who we throw out so that they can do something else while we grown-ups worship. And I think that, both as a parent and as a member of the congregation and staff, has been the most beautiful transition that is ongoing through our time. One of the other things that's really incredible is that this hour in between gives us the perfect opportunity to rehearse things all together. This is the second year, 2012 is the second year we did a Christmas pageant in a long time. When we did it in 2011, it was really hard. We never had the opportunity to get all the kids together. We couldn't practice in the sanctuary because worship was happening in the sanctuary. Our kids were not, I don't think were quite as regular, attending as fully. And then this last year, it was, right, we couldn't get parents to help. Right. So this last year, we had a faith formation hour during Advent, was during our faith, was our Sundays.
There was no Sunday school. It was
Right, thank you. It was pageant rehearsal, so kids didn't have anything else to do. Parents were enlisted to help. Nothing was happening in the sanctuary, so we could practice the pageant where we were going to perform it, and it was incredible. I mean, we had probably 80 people involved in the Christmas pageant. It was beautiful, and that creates I mean, just the shift in schedule created that opportunity to have that time to do that.
To do it in 4 weeks.
Exactly.
Regular time.
We didn't have to have any extra rehearsals, we didn't have to have anything in the evenings, it was pretty awesome. Hopefully you saw it with our skit, but one of the things I think we all really picked up on, something that's been developing, is that our services have become very integrated. We have kind of a key seed each Sunday, and then we all take our individual parts and run with them. And for those of you who are musicians, you know that it takes more preparation. I need to know what that seed is like 6 weeks out, whereas Benjamin can go with a sermon on Friday morning and he's got it on Sunday. So we've got this opportunity to be able to talk to each other about, what is that seed going to be? And as far as, several months in advance, so that I can find worship music that fits in there. We can find hymns that speak to the theme we're looking at, and we can find chancel stewards who are going to use the perfect image in the center of the chancel so that everybody can see, oh, that's what we're talking about this week. That's what's important to us this month. However that works, so that we can incorporate those kind of things.
Can I just ask right at this point, do you guys follow lectionary? Do you vary both ways, or how do you choose that?
Generally, we follow lectionary, although
There are times when we've decided a different theme for Lent or, so we're doing.
And actually, that's how Sunday school aligns too, so you don't have to be too concerned about that not fitting in.
What are your summers like?
Yeah. Well, this past summer, it was interesting because this was right before we launched this whole new program, right? So we're a little nervous, like not knowing how well this is going to go. And Benjamin was on sabbatical. So we narrowed down our summer worship to one service, and it was at the same time as our, no, it was
at 10 o'clock.
At 10
right?
o'clock. And then afterwards, we had, once a month, we had a big dinner kind of thing where we talked about our work during the sabbatical as a congregation. And what it really helped to do, because we had a topic and we had something to talk about and we had scripture and we were doing religious education around the table, and we weren't just sitting around drinking coffee and chatting about the weather. People really enjoyed it, and they were hungry for it. And so we had 3 of those, and then they had some fellowship involved in that, but they also had that really enriching atmosphere of being able to talk to people they didn't know about things that mattered to them. And I think that kind of whet the appetite for it, but so when we shifted, we were amazed at how popular it was, and people just crammed into these adult. That's the one thing where you have a challenge is like, where do we put everybody? So that's a good challenge, but yeah.
How long ago did you launch this? Was it September last year?
This most recent September.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long ago did you start conversations or start thinking about the aspect vision?
Really, how long ago?
In January, we really started nutting it out.
A year ago,
January,
this
but
month,
then
really we're like,
yeah.
we're going to do
Well,
this? Okay,
the
what would it look
stimulus,
like?
the stimulus was that we had hired a youth director, and she was saying, I can't get youth to come to anything. Everybody's like here, there, and everywhere. And how can I ask a parent who has a kid in Joyful Noise Choir to bring her kid back for Al? I mean, there's a problem here. And so she's the one that was able to say to us, oh, we need to start looking at that. And then when she came back and said, oh, look at the faith formation offerings. They're all for retired people. It's like, wow, she's right. It's like kind of opened our eyes to that. And it took somebody with that as their focus to be able to see that, to do that research and to start to show us, like, wow, we're really missing out here.
It's also a part of a paradigm shift in the way we look at the world, I think. The biggest question I get this past month is, how's it going? And my response is, it's going phenomenal except for the staff I got to work with. Which leads into my comment that somehow these guys have put together this process and they modeled the staff organization, which I feel blessed to be a part of, Because I know from my background experience, which is from an organizational and youth group nonprofit sector forte, you cannot impose change. You've got to think it out. You've got to approach it less from what are the problems, because you can spend your entire life putting out fires, which is common with nonprofits, and I suspect in many churches. We don't have enough volunteers, we don't have enough staff. But as Marty came in with this group and said, what's our highest potential? What are the opportunities? Then you engage in dialogue, then you bring the key leadership in, and the more folks you have that co-create the vision and roll it out, I think the more likely it will be that ownership will be broader and it'll succeed. I love the aspect that's very integral, and I see that happening in the staff meetings. There's just this incredible commitment to mission, there's passion, and yet my sense is we want all of us to succeed as opposed to working in silos and having to go back to our offices. It's how do we all make this work? And last Sunday, and this is the last piece, I saw it going down to the congregation on how they want to succeed and they want to integrate it. When kids, 2 girls in the senior high group pulled me aside and said, we want to do an overnight with the middle school girls and we're going to plan. So it's that idea that they're seeing the integration and they're taking, so somewhere that's being modeled, whether it's by the teachers, the staff, volunteers, but it's happening. And that's when you know something about the process is working. So I mean,
It's important to pick up on those things the minute you hear them.
Yeah, and be fluid enough to be able to act on it. So it's like, oh no, we just don't do that. And we don't do overnight, sorry.
You talk about modeling, I think, for us, for staff and for the congregation, the modeling that our leadership, our ministers give, and that intentionality with their language. What they are saying from the pulpit and how they're saying it, to me, really is significant. It filters down through us and then it becomes common language rather than just their language. And I think that's really important to kickstart here.
I also want to add that we went through an envisioning process that was a really important piece, so that people were really primed to look at themselves more closely and look at the church more closely. How are we following? What are our goals and our aspirations as a church? And are we following this? Who are we really? And it was really cool to be able to be a part of that with the council. And we had somebody a consultant leading us through that. And we would tell these stories about 5 years or so? Tell a story about what we're doing. And so she took all of these stories and she pulled out all the values in them. And what we discovered in that, and it's the best envisioning process I've ever been through, and I've been through a lot of them. And the thing that she pulled out of it was that we know who we are, and we're really glad about who we are, and we want to deepen down into that. So let's just be more explicit about this extravagant welcome. Well, if we are extravagantly welcoming people, what does that look like from the door to the kitchen? And then introduce the entry hall, like when you come in, the entry hall is where he's like, oh, can I take your coat? Welcome, And then you get into the living room or the sanctuary where you're like, you're handed your coffee and you come and sit down and you join in the discussion and the worship. And then there's the kitchen. So all the folks that stay afterwards and help clean up, they're the ones that are doing all the rolling up their sleeves and doing the work of the church. And so I just think that envisioning process really had us primed to make this big shift.
Luke had a follow-up.
I did. I just need to know whose business card I need. We, a year ago, eliminated our program during worship for children. So we have everybody in the sanctuary right now. And at the end of this month, we're having a World Cafe discussion about what a new worship program for our younger members might look like. And I'm wondering, it sounds like I need all of your business cards to call you on a Tuesday morning to ask some more questions about what the conversations were like in your transition period. But is there somebody that's, Belle, it sounds like you're kind of in charge of the kids worship. Okay, so I need your business card.
Let's see, what do I want to say? First of all, I love the integration with the kids. We don't have any kids, that is to say we have 2 kids. And I'm not going to try to make a parallel because I just have this tiny church and it's nothing like what you guys got. But, and me, Pastor pastors don't get very many opportunities to actually attend other people's churches, so it was really wonderful for me when I had a chance to go with my mom and actually see what the worship was like. And what I really liked, and I was jealous, very terribly jealous of, was I could feel the enthusiasm in the congregation. And although our worship styles, our UCC worship styles are not all that dramatically different from church to church, and either is yours is pretty fundamentally the same, there were lots of little things that I kind of picked up on that felt different, that felt more enthusiastic, and the congregation kind of knew what they were about, and from the repetition of the 3 words at the beginning to some of the ways in which you kind of move back and forth between formal and informal things within the worship itself. I was very taken with that, and I thought it was really well done. And like I said, very jealous. But I thought the kids stuff was great. We do have those 2 kids, and they come to worship service, and we have a place in the back where kids can go if they get bored. They can go back in the back room, and there's stuff to do back there. But and sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. I always worry a little bit because they're like 5 and 8, and I always wonder whether they're going to really be bored listening to my sermon. But sometimes they stay right through and listen. And recently, one of them wanted to get up and do we have such a small, we don't have ushers, so when I do the offering, I just pick up the plates, and somebody just volunteers to take them around to the small group that we have there. And one of the kids wanted to do that, with a 5-year-old.
Yeah.
And I just handed her the plate, and she did it. And we've had people in service before who had a waiting kid or something like that. And my whole attitude is, that's fine. I mean, the kids are a part of this whole thing, no matter what they do or how they act. And I just ignore the crying, or sometimes I'll make a cute remark, like, oh, well, that's a nice comment, or something like that, and everybody laughs. But the point is that, yeah, the kids ought to be there if they want to be, and we ought to be welcoming them. It's not about saying kids shouldn't be here, this is not kids hour. Well,
Kirk, as you're talking, I'm realizing that I've had various what I would call radicalizing moments where your mind, your eyes are open to a new reality. One of them was early in my ministry, and some of you may remember, I was preaching on Jesus' words about whoever does not hate their family, their mother, their father. I was asking a rhetorical question why Jesus would say that, and how old was Laura Jane at the time? She was probably, I don't know, 2nd grade. She's sitting there in the front view, kind of looking down, and she starts answering my rhetorical questions out loud. And that was a radicalizing moment, like, wait a second. Like, there are children here, and they're listening, and they're paying attention. Whether or not we're inviting them to do that, they are. I had another one more recently, where I had decided I just got through the preaching program through the ACTS in Chicago. And so I was trying some new things, and I thought, I want to try to preach a sermon, narrative sermon, that does what, great Disney movies do, where like there are jokes that the adults all laugh really hard at, and the kids are kind of like, what's that all about? And then there are things that the kids think are so funny. So it speaks at 2 levels at once. So I gave this sermon on Christmas Eve, and I think the children's choir was singing at the same service. And I'm giving this sermon, and I look over, and they all have activities that we've given out. Now, the great intention behind the activities was, we know you're here, and we want to, I don't know exactly what we were communicating. We want to give you something that you can do during worship. I think the best intention of it was what we've now started to say, which is we want to give our children tools to help them to participate. Adults need tools too.
Yeah.
We've got knitters. We would say, I listen better if I'm knitting, so please don't be offended. I mean, it's the same thing. But on that Christmas Eve, I had painstakingly created this sermon that I wanted to speak on 2 levels, and I looked down and they weren't paying any attention. And they really weren't. Like, I checked in, and because what we had communicated is, welcome to worship. We're so glad you're here. Thank you for singing the song that you're going to sing in a little while. you probably won't be listening to the sermon, so here's a coloring page. So out of that, we started to realize, could we do multi-generational worship more often? And we've tried doing multi-generational worship before, which was basically, we would call it multi-generational worship, we would give the kids some stuff to do, and we wouldn't really change anything. So we really had to start taking that seriously. And so what we've done now is on the first Sunday of every month, we do multi-generational worship. So our kids' community worship we actually call godly play worship. And it's only for the youngest, it's preschool, kindergarten first. And we even say to them, you can please stay in the sanctuary if you like, or you can. So we've got a range of children in there, and Jackie and I have to preach. We have to preach a shorter narrative sermon with lots of sensory words. And I cannot tell you, I mean, we've only been doing this now for a little while, but every time that service comes up on my first reaction is, oh, crap. Because it's not my first seminary trained inclination to preach in that way, but my second thought is, okay, we can do this. So then I try to create a sermon that has a narrative piece to it. So it was really interesting, Marion, that you invoked the hippo, because last Sunday we do an annual Evolution Sunday, and I preached all about the behemoth, which I quoted one zoologist as saying that's the hippo. So the whole sermon was about how awesome the hippo is, and the intent. I don't know how well I succeeded or not. I'll have to check with some kids. The intent was to, again, speak on those two levels. So it's both interesting from an adult point of view, but also worth listening to from a child's point of view.
I don't know whether the whole thing of what you do in worship, I hope you keep talking to, because I really think something's key there in my sense. And also these days, a lot of people out there beyond the church just don't even know what is worship. Why should I want to do this? What use is it? And so that's part of our problem in general. But whatever you're doing something right. And I don't know whether that presentation that you made a few weeks ago was the kids' monthly sermon or not. But tell us about that one where you went out and modeled kind of arrogance and. Because that would really work. My mom reported back to congregation. I thought that was something else.
Not everybody loved that.
There's a podcast for that one, by the way, if you haven't.
I tried to get it. I haven't been licensed
It's a
yet.
podcast, and it's hilarious. I've listened to it.
I need to see that. I haven't been able technologically. I'll figure it out.
Well, briefly, Jesus says, beware the scribes who like to be greeted in the marketplaces and walk around in their long robes, and they like the seats of honor. So I just took that to the extreme. I actually had Mandy introduce me, and she made this big deal about the Reverend and now Doctor.
And you came out in all these fancy robes.
And I came out. I used this black
Cape
that was
the drape that went all
40
over
feet
40
long.
feet.
And I walked in, and I even got somebody to kiss my ring. And I walked up, and those of you who are associates, you'll either love or hate this, but I got up all the way to the pulpit, and this train goes all the way across the chancel and down the steps, and I go, and Jackie goes, she goes, I was very apologetic.
Was that a children's?
No, that was just
That was regular Sunday. But the point is that trying to preach those multi-generational narrative sermons have affected the way I do the rest of my preaching.
Yeah.
So I think I've noticed Lynn's hand for a while.
Yeah, I just want to speak as someone who's been out there as this has been happening inside the church. And I was just remembering the time a few years ago, this is a few years ago, but when Kate gave the sermon as a 10-year-old. And and it was incredible and powerful, and she'll be president someday and you can vote for her. But it was a fully inclusive moment. And So what I've loved about watching, and it's been great because they were like wringing their hands like, oh my God, and how is this going to happen? And Ben is in sabbatical in South Africa, and we're here holding the bag, and it's going to launch in September, and it's like, shit, you know? There was a lot of and it's been incredible. And the energy and the enthusiasm that you saw, that's been actually true for a long time. We've been a really healthy intergenerational church. So it was starting there.
Yeah.
But what I've noticed is that you see we have 5 like really incredible staff people, and now they're working, so each of them fire creatively in a huge way, but now it's arcing together. And so the creativity is like arcing and sparking, and the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, is in there with full permission too. And so synergistically, I think a whole lot more is happening with you guys and with the congregation as well. So that was just one piece. Yeah, you guys have mentioned, and I think this has been true for a long time, but still true, that at FCC for Colorado Springs, this all are welcome. It includes all forms of worship. It really includes all. It's like all, like really all, like a bell and a saxophone and a 2-year-old and a 90-year-old and a wheelchair and a full-out choir, and it's all of that plays really well together. So I don't experience tension between an old binary, traditional or contemporary. It's more like we're all juicy people of God, we're all there, and we get to play with that, and isn't that cool? And so I think that's one piece that's really true. An example of that was that Oregon, we have the first Hook and Hastings organ west of the Mississippi, very traditional, very amazing. And one day, a dear friend of mine, Lynn, I'm also Lynn, we see each other after church, the organ's been kicking ass. I'm like, oh my God. And she's like, yeah. And I'm like, oh my God, don't you love it? And she goes, no, I hate it. And here I assume she loved it because we're so much the same. And she said, but you know what? From now on, when the organ's doing that thing, I can think Lynn Young is happy. And you kind of alluded to that, Dell, a little bit. Like that, we are all getting something together. And the last thing I want to say is, years ago, Ben and I were at one of these. It wasn't Congregations Alive, it was
Is this Greeley?
Spirit Alive, yeah, I think so. Something was alive. And we were at a weekend like this, and we picked up a book in the bookshop, and it was about messy spirituality. And we held it, and we talked about it, and we cried at a passage about a person coming up and reading the scripture who had a speech impediment, and people could hardly understand it, but it was such a holy moment. And I just believe that we are willing to risk, and we're willing to make a mess, knowing that the Spirit is in it.
I think also part of it, we came to our own, and we decided to be an ONA church, and it was hard as hell. But when you took that risk, and you said, this is who we are, you had to claim it for all it was worth, and that's made it bigger.
There's Janet's hand.
You guys said you really started talking serious about this in the planning in January. We've been kind of going through a year-long revisioning kind of process, and it's very exciting because the council and all the teams that I meet with are just like that. They're so excited. There's so many ideas coming, and we've included the congregation in 2 world phase now. So we really believe this is where the Spirit is leading us, together. But some of the changes that you talked about making, I'm kind of curious. When and how did you kind of present that to the whole congregation? I mean, you've got this going on in the background, and it's great and wonderful. But, then there's all the, you got all those people. I have a couple, 3, 4 out there. But, how did you kind of bring them along or get them involved in this as well?
So again,
Even though our world
so
kit page has done that a
you
little
were
bit.
asking, so let's see if I can remember.
I know, it's kind of trying to think
So,
of the actual.
Again, just to accentuate, it's kind of been a culture, part of the culture, that there's some tolerance for risk, as Lynn has said. I think a great deal of trust. This congregation has had, and we may be pretty unique in this, a long series of long tenured
That
pastors.
is unusual.
So I think that builds institutional trust. And then as we were exploring this, we made some changes, you just make them. I mean, you start doing worship differently, you make a choice to use language differently, and I think, as pastors and leaders, we just kind of do that and see what kind of feedback or kickback you
I
get.
think sometimes you let us know what you're up to, too.
And sometimes,
We're
yeah.
very transparent.
Yeah, very
Yeah.
deliberate. This is why we're saying it this way, or this is why we're doing this, or what we're going for. And again, you've got your feelers out there
And
to see
even
what
in
people
the
are.
multi-generation, you even had that description. This is what a multi-generational worship is,
Yeah.
in the bulletin.
Yeah, so I think it's communicating, telling people what you're doing, why you're doing it, and then telling them again why you're doing it and what the ultimate goal is. So we used all of the media that we had, our, the newsletter, the weekly email blast, pulpit announcements, those kinds of things. But then we got to the point where we're like, ooh, if we're going to change Sunday morning worship time, who makes that decision? Is that a congregational vote? Is that something that the council decides? Is it something the staff decides? Is it something that the pastor decides? And in our particular context, I had that conversation, just the conversation of who and how is this decision getting made. I had that conversation with multiple people. There was a very useful resource that was these kind of different kinds of decisions. One decision is made by one person without consultation, just make it. In some decisions, that's the appropriate thing to do. And then it kind of goes up the line, how much more consultation? And at the other end of the spectrum is, this has to be a congregational vote, it's a group discernment process, no one person is making it, everybody's got to do it. So we decided that with this, it was, first of all, neither extreme, but closer to the end of consultation, but ultimately I was the one who made the decision. And I think what we determined was, I determined, first of all, I'm not making the decision unless I am sure that, the vast majority of people would be supportive of it. And so there were all kinds of conversations in different committee settings, council settings, informally, with teachers at teacher training, with parents when they were picking up kids, all across the board. And then finally, I said, I think I'm ready to make this decision. The council's on board, the staff's on board, the conversations are all leading in this direction. And then I communicated that we were going to do this. And when did I do that?
Before you went on sabbatical.
That's the perfect time.
I think it was February. I think we had the really, what's it going to look like? And then February made the decision. And then, because I was going to be on sabbatical, I was like, okay, so we've made the decision. Now we got to start working on it now while I'm still here, so that we can define what needs to happen while I'm not here. So that's really how the decision got made. And that way, in a sense, congregationalism can be so, it's not one way to do it. But in our context anyway, it made sense for me to make that decision, because then I could be the person that people either say, great job, or and they're not pitting people with different philosophies against each other. And yet we had a lot of consultation before I kind of came to that decision.
As a staff member, I think, one of my challenges that I put on my list of things was the time to do it, like on a weekly thing where you're part-time and you're just getting through the week stuff. To put time that you need to invest in this, you don't make on your own. And I think when Ben makes that decision, and Jackie, when that comes from that leadership, and as a staff, we're going to sit down in January, we're going to make time to do this. It wouldn't have happened as a staff if they hadn't have prescribed that. And that really happened. And then we got the boat rolling, and then it went. So I think it really does come from that ultimate leadership.
Can I ask you something else real quick? And that is, I know that you guys are all, this is great. But nothing is really perfect, right? And so, where at this point, do you see some things, each one of you, that you'd like to still make some changes, or that you'd like to go somewhere else, or that isn't quite working right, that you'd like to tweak?
I miss the fellowship hour as an old-time member.
Do you?
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah, I hear that too. And we're hoping that maybe these once a month soup, it's a youth fundraiser, Soup Sundays, people gather around kind of like they did for the sabbatical part of Welcoming the Stranger. But they don't have that topic to talk about. It's more just a mixer. And but and I hear that a lot, because there are people who are coming from different parts of the city, and they don't get to see each other, and that Sunday morning is it, and then now they have to make a specific date to be able to do that.
I know we're just.
Probably the last question, because we're just about to do good.
But to what extent was your, I know choirs hold a lot of power in those congregations. And I'm wondering to what extent were all staff, like i.e. your chancel choir director and so on, your organist or accompanist, were they on board with the visioning process and the process leading up to the change in Sunday morning? And if so, just what was your experience with that, and maybe we can elaborate after the time has expired. Because we've got a choir. It would be great if our choir was minimal and our music program sucked, but it doesn't. There's still high quality. I think there's some differentiations on musical styles, but we can't just say, oh, let's start over. And we have a director who's been there for 31.5 years. So I'm wondering to what extent were the planets aligned for you guys staff-wise?
Yeah. Well, when this decision was made, I was actually part-time, just the chancel choir director. Our music director left, and I took over the position. Interestingly enough, our building is quite small. We don't have a lot of space, and the chancel choir has had to be flexible in that we used to rehearse on Sunday mornings from 10:30 to 11 o'clock in the music room, but there's currently a faith formation hour that happens in the music room, so we lost our space. And we warm up really, really quickly. We have got to be ready on Wednesday night because we don't have any time to make up for it on Sunday mornings. We rehearse in the sanctuary. Sometimes there's people in the pews. Overall, there was some pushback, because I'm like, hey, this is our space. But they've seen the value. Many of them are going to the classes that are happening during Faith Formation Hour. And they know how important, and I try to be very, very transparent with them and tell them, this is what we're talking about right now. And here's what could happen. Here's the direction that we'd like to move towards. How do you feel about that? What's going on? And overall, I think that speaks to, how we communicate it to the entire congregation with that transparency and with that, here's what we'd like to do. You get that buy-in, and now they're fine with it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for your
Thank you.
presence.